From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, I'm Carla Gonzalez, and this is From the South. We start in Colombia, where presidential candidates Gustavo Petro and Iván Duque are set to contest in a second round of elections. On Sunday's vote, right-wing candidate Iván Duque of the Democratic Center Party took the lead with over 39% of the votes. He was closely followed by left-wing candidate Gustavo Petro of the Colombia Humana Party with 25% of the votes. This was the first presidential election that took place after the peace accords with the FARC were signed, a historic deal that ended with 50 years of internal armed conflict. The implementation of the peace process, the improvements of domestic economy and universal education are the main topics in Duque and Petro's agendas. The second round of election will be on June 17. This presidential election was marked by the largest participation in 20 years, with almost 20 million voters of up to 36 million people qualified to vote. That represents a participation of over 53%, according to the Colombian National Civil Registry. The outcome contrasted with the high abstention seen during the last presidential election in 2014 that reached almost 60%. Conservative candidate Iván Duque called for all Colombians to remain united during this next election. Duque said if elected, he will represent all and pointed out the need for the country to address an agenda with clear proposals. The right-wing candidate said he wants to maintain the peace agreement and that his main fight will be against corruption.
We don't want to tear apart the agreements. What we want is to make it clear that the Colombia of peace is the Colombia where peace is found with justice, that there is truth, there is reparation, that there is compliance with punishments. Social justice also requires concrete proposals, not empty speeches, not inciting class hatred, not stigmatizing the productive sectors. I want to say to Gustavo Petro that we are ready for the confrontation of ideas and proposals. We are ready to give Colombia a high-level debate.
Meanwhile, Gustavo Petro said he can overcome his contender during the second round and that he will work to reach victory. Petro, a former member of the M19 armed group, achieved a milestone by becoming the first left-wing candidate to get the second round. Polls have suggested the end of the conflict with the FARC has shifted voters' priorities from security issues to inequality and corruption. This opens the door for a left-wing candidate to reach office for the first time.
The free will of citizens seems to be with those who do not have a roof. We are moving forward with a firm, steady step, always moving forward. Be sure that we will have victory. The history of Colombia can be changed. We are going to talk about at the ballot boxes in 15 days, a return to violence or building peace. We have given it our all. We are not playing with fire so as to have a Colombia that is in peace.
And despite this democratic demonstration on Sunday, the shadow of fraud keeps chasing Colombia's electoral process. Petro's party, Colombia Humana, reported the presence of pre-marked votes in favor of candidate Iván Duque in different Colombian departments. The party also said Colombian police acted violently against Petro supporters in the southern city of Ipiales. The committee said it will keep an eye on other possible irregularities. Petro already announced that his party was deploying over 60,000 electoral witnesses to watch the process and criticized the use of accounting software that has reported failures. We talked to independent journalist Richard McCall to analyze what this outcome means to the peace process and to Colombia's near future.
There's still hope. There's still hope for that the peace process can be carried out as it has been managed in the last couple of years. Gustavo Petro, of course, is a left-wing candidate. He's a socialist, which is quite unusual in this predominantly conservative country, I would say. At the same time, he says that he will see out and see through the peace process. So we've got an interesting month ahead of us until the second round on June 17th.
We also spoke with former Ecuadorian Foreign Minister Guillaume Long about President Juan Manuel Santos' announcement of Colombia becoming the first Latin American global partner to NATO, simultaneously to the electoral process.
I think it's very sad news. I remember expressing my discomfort with the fact at the time when I was foreign minister to my colleague, María Ángel Holguín, who announced that they were observers of NATO. Colombia had become an observer state of NATO. I expressed my discomfort with that decision. And now that they've become full members, now that Colombia's become full member of NATO, I think it's very bad news. I mean, the idea was to have a security agreement within UNASUR. This is why we created the Consejo de Defensa of UNASUR, the Council, the Board of the Council of Defense of UNASUR, and to have a organization like NATO permeate the South American continent when we know what NATO means, basically a tool, a military tool of the United States, is obviously bad news for the construction of sovereignty. I mean, I've questioned NATO per se. I think it's an organization that belongs to the Cold War. It's been an organization that's been in the way of European sovereignty, for example, for Europe to have a sovereign foreign policy and defense policy. And that's in the case of Europe, a much stronger institution. Now, you can imagine what that would mean for UNASUR, which is still in kind of this slow process of being born. In fact, with facing a number of problems at the moment, with 6 countries that are partially withdrawing. Anyway, so NATO, Colombia being part of NATO, a major defeat for those of us who defend Latin American integration and Latin American sovereignty.
Let's turn to El Salvador now, where Hugo Martinez was elected as the presidential candidate of the Farabundo Martín National Liberation Front, or FMLN, for the upcoming 2019 election. Martinez was elected with 19,793 votes. After the results were in, the now presidential candidate thanked his supporters, especially the war veterans who voted for him. 262 polling stations were set up through the country. Polls closed at 8 p.m. local time. Family members of the victims of armed violence in Peru have denounced what they see as a systematic campaign against the memory of their loved ones.
Edwin Donaire disguised himself to record a message with a hidden camera at the place of memory. In the video, he denounces the space, which pays tribute to the victims of atrocities carried out by the Shining Path and the Peruvian government during the 80s and 90s. According to the congressman, the memorial makes apology for terrorism, a sentiment that the relatives of victims staunchly reject.
In the place of memory, we have the pictures, some clothes. Our fight is there, so our sons, our grandsons can later see what happened with their grandparents and how we fought.
For those affected by the human rights violations committed in Peru between the years 1980 and 2000, Congressman Edwin Donaire's attacks mark a systematic campaign promoted by political and military agents linked to the governments, under which these crimes were committed.
That's why it's necessary to have these memory spaces that convey the truth of history, to be told what happened, to show the way how people lived in Ayacucho, Selva Central. Because if we aren't capable of talking about these facts, we're going to forget them easily.
It's not just the place of memory that is being attacked. There are other spaces and art exhibitions, like the movie La Casa Rosada, that tells of the events in a torture center directed by the Peruvian army, or the Sarjua Tablas, a sculpture in which the experiences of the Andean people of Sarjua are reflected.
This happens when you end all processes brought out against human rights violators like Fujimori.
To this National Human Rights Coordinator, impunity is not the only target of this campaign.
To intimidate the population is to criminalize the people who fight for their rights. That is the main argument.
Although the legislature, dominated by Fujimorismo, advances in its objective to censor these spaces, human rights organizations and victims claim that they will defend them from justice systems and in the streets.
We'll take our short break now, but join us again after this video from our multimedia team.
Opponents of the peace agreement in Colombia celebrated big victories in the March 11th congressional election. Some say this is due to widespread fraud, with the Electoral Observation Mission of Colombia reporting over 1,200 violations. Apparent vote buying was caught on camera. 20% of voting centers didn't have enough ballots. 30% say they were not allowed to vote privately. And voters across the country reported physical threats and violence against leftist candidates and supporters. The New York Times reported that when dozens of those paramilitary leaders were arrested, known for commanding widespread civilian massacres, disappearances, and forced displacements, Uribe extradited them to the U.S. so they could serve short sentences and evade accountability in Colombia. When the state-backed paramilitary network United Self-Defense Forces of Colombia, which publicly declared trade unionists legitimate targets for assassination, was implicated for widespread massacres and torture, the Uribe administration ensured little or no jail time. Uribe himself enjoys presidential immunity for his proven role in multiple war crimes.
Welcome back. In Barbados, new members of cabinet and parliamentary secretaries were sworn in. Prime Minister Mia Mottley said her cabinet is larger than normal, but says despite the country's economic situation, the cost of a few extra salaries won't compare to how much they will save from having a more efficient government. Mottley herself will be Minister of Finance and will try to help guide Barbados out of the economic crisis.
That the cabinet of ministers will be relatively large because I've not only considered the mandate given to us by the people, but also the scope of the work to be done and the level of expertise that is at our disposal among elected members.
Mottley also proposed an amendment of the Constitution to allow the opposition party that got the highest number of votes to recommend 2 appointments to the Senate to learn their point of view on different issues.
We have discussed the need for an urgent amendment of the Constitution to allow the opposition political party securing the highest number of votes to recommend 2 appointments to the Senate, because we believe that even though there has been no official leader of the opposition, my government would wish to have accommodated the views of the main opposition party that secured the largest amount of votes. In this instance, we are effectively speaking about the Democratic Labour Party.
In Brazil, President Michel Temer announced a reduction on diesel prices to put an end to the truck drivers' strike that has paralyzed the country for a week. The cut equals to 10 cents per liter, although this reduction will only last for 60 days. Temer said he also agreed to 4 other demands that truckers made to put an end to the strike. The Brazilian government deployed the military to clear barricades built by strikers. Security forces have been escorting fuel trucks since Friday to supply refineries, airports, power plants, and medical facilities. Trucks move 60% of the goods that are transported in Brazil.
Diesel will be reduced by 10 cents per liter. so that each trucker feels this effect exactly at the time they fill their tank. I want to express my full confidence, government confidence in the natural spirit of responsibility, solidarity, and patriotism of each of those truckers who serve our country.
Let's hear from our correspondent in Sao Paulo, Ignacio Lemus, who has the latest on the truck drivers' strike.
According to President Michel Temer, the strike was over a couple of days ago when he made an agreement with truck drivers. Despite this, however, a group of truck drivers did not reach a deal with the government and left the negotiation meeting. President Temer announced the deployment of military forces to unblock the roads affected by the strike. Various groups continue striking across the country, especially in the road to the Santos port, which is a major trade port for Brazilian products.
That was Ignacio Lemus from Sao Paulo. Storm Alberto hits the western Cuban region of Artemisa. The storm swelled a nearby river and dumped up to 12 centimeters of rain in less than 8 hours. According to local media, some families were evacuated, but the rain and flooding were quick to hit. Central regions of Cuba, like Villa Clara, were also affected. Subtropical storm Alberto is moving north through the Gulf of Mexico, also threatening heavy rains and winds to the U.S. southern coastal states.
Flooding to this extent, this is the first time that it's happened.
I was affected a lot. My mattresses got wet. It's cold. 15 bags of cement that I had that was given to me to fix up my house got wet. There was no time to get anything out.
Bolivian President Evo Morales has accused right-wing sectors in Bolivia of attempting to disrupt his government. With more information, here is Freddy Morales, our correspondent in La Paz.
President Evo Morales has reported right-wing sectors are attempting to disrupt its government through lies and are trying to discredit his administration. He says that right-wing sectors are using lies to attack him. In 2002, when the president was a deputy, a lie campaign was unleashed against him to ban him from the legislative power. Now political opposition has raised a campaign against Morales' government after a student died at a demonstration at El Salto State University to demand a budget increase to the government. Autopsy has revealed that the student died from the impact of a marble. According to the government minister, Carlos Romero, the marble was fired by the students at the protest.
Freddy Morales from La Paz. And let's continue in Bolivia. The country is preparing to celebrate the Fiesta del Gran Poder, the biggest cultural celebration in capital city La Paz. These festivities generate work for thousands of artisans and millions of dollars for local businesses.
This machine seals the seams of costumes that have been worked on for hours by local artisans, who every year innovate with designs and colors, leading to the high-quality embroidered costumes.
Those of us who get hired for El Gran Poder know it's worth it, because you have work secured for the whole year. These festivities extend all over La Paz, so we all want to be part of it.
The festivities are a celebration of El Señor de Gran Poder, an image of Christ which is revered as miraculous. The event has become a source of income for over 9,000 artisans.
There's some business between January and November, but during a celebration such as this, it explodes. You earn enough for the rest of the year.
They cost about $100. It comes with everything: boots, hat, underskirt, everything.
Renting a costume costs between $20 and $100. It depends on how many times it has been rented. The most expensive costume for sale is the Moreno. It's a dance that remembers the cruelty against slaves brought from Africa to the silver mines of Potosi.
It can cost up to $1,500. The price is rising. I do this every year upon request, and I do it how they want it.
Dance groups are organized in 74 ensembles that perform around 20 dances. Just one ensemble could have around 5,000 members.
We have around 40,000 dancers. The day starts at 7 a.m. and ends at 1 a.m. There are also 6,000 musicians. More than 80 bands accompany the ensembles, with up to 5,000 members.
The city of La Paz estimates that the Jesus de Gran Poder celebration generates around $150 million a year.
In Mexico, the indigenous people of Cherán elected new officials on Sunday in its traditional way. Over 5,000 Purepecha or Tarascans people who live in the center region of Michoacán choose for the third time their Keres, their greatest. The 12 members of their council created in 2011. Back then, fed up of their municipal president and policemen working with organized crime and gangs to extort money and loot their forest, they expelled them from the community. Now the indigenous community is self-managed according to customs, founding a community round of 79 vigilantes and succeeding in establishing a democratic system of self-determination, unique in Mexico and recognized by the state.
The Cherán model has innovated in many ways because it has come up with a way of choosing officials in a totally different format from the Mexican electoral system that has been around, at least, for the last 50 years.
We'll take a short break now, but join us again after this look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting. Welcome back. Tensions ran high in Berlin as thousands of far-right Alternative for Germany supporters were met by an overwhelming number of counter-protesters all across the German capital. At some points, police were forced to intervene as AfD supporters marched on from Berlin's central train station to Berlin's Brandenburg Gate. More than 2,000 police officers from across Germany have been drafted into the capital to prevent violence. After the 2017 federal elections, the far-right AfD secured 94 seats in the German parliament, becoming the third largest grouping and largest opposition party to Angela Merkel's coalition government. Political crisis in Italy is back. Here's more on that and other stories making headlines around the world.
Italy is back in political and constitutional turmoil after President Sergio Mattarella vetoed a candidate for finance minister proposed by the coalition of anti-establishment Five-Star Movement and the far-right Northern League. Citing concerns by investors, Mattarella said he couldn't appoint the Eurosceptic Paolo Savono to be the finance minister, and instead he appointed a stopgap prime minister. Analysts say chances of early elections are very high. After the announcement, there have been calls for the impeachment of the president. After a surprise meeting between North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and South Korean President Moon Jae-in at the border village of Panmunjom on Saturday to ensure the North Korean-US summit, Moon said that more impromptu talks between the two Koreas should take place. The unplanned meeting was called after US President Donald Trump abruptly cancelled the summit with Kim last week, but later said he is reconsidering it.
If we could hold working-level, back-to-back talks on both sides of Panmunjom, if urgently necessary in addition to formal summits, it will expedite faster advancement of inter-Korean relations.
In a rare move, New Zealand's government has ordered to kill more than 100,000 cows in an attempt to eradicate the cow disease Mycoplasma bovis. This would be the biggest mass animal slaughter in the history of the country. Mycoplasma bovis manifests in the mastitis in cows, causes severe pneumonia and ear infections. After the culling, New Zealand will become the world's first country to eradicate the infectious disease.
Hundreds of environmentalists and volunteers have hit the beach of Lamma Island in Hong Kong to clean up after campaigners warned that plastic is killing sea turtles and other wildlife. There has been increasing concern over the amount of rubbish in Hong Kong waters, which washes up on its numerous beaches. Campaigners say the most common cause of death of sea turtles in the area is due to trash ingestion. They demand to expand the restricted areas for the turtles along the sea to increase their survival rate. A noble action from far away. And with that, we come to the end of this news brief. But this and other stories you can find on our website at telesurtv.net.